It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show. It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show. It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show. It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show.
Yes, indeed, this is the Stage and Screen Show with me, Andy Snowden, here each and every Saturday on Calon FM until 3 p.m. And now it is time for our special guest. And today it comes in the form of the frontman of Johnny Hates Jazz, Mr. Clark Datchler. Clark rose to fame in 1987 as the lead singer and songwriter of the band Johnny Hates Jazz, a band that went on to dominate the 80s with massive hits like Shattered Dreams and Turn Back the Clock. And even now, nearly 500,000 monthly listeners on Spotify and over 25 million plays on the remastered version of Shattered Dreams alone. It's quite clear that the Johnny Hates Jazz fans aren't going anywhere. They have a brand new album out. It is called Wide Awake, about to be released along with the brand new single, The Fantastic New Day Ahead. I'll play it for you in a moment, but first, let's hear from the man himself. Here he is on the Stage and Screen Show, Calon FM, Clark Datchler. I suppose, and I'm starting all my interviews these days with the same question. How's lockdown treating you? How are you coping, all right?
Well, it's been an interesting process because on one hand, of course, I'm looking at what's happening at the world around us with horror. And obviously it's been traumatic for a lot of people, whether they've suffered from COVID-19 and then recovered or people have lost loved ones in the process. That's been absolutely dreadful. So I predicate whatever I'm going to say on that, really. At the same time, in my situation, I think one thing that I've noticed is just how quiet it became and how much nature returned to places where there wasn't a lot of nature left before.
Yeah.
And that's actually an amazing thing. That's a wonderful thing. And I think it's not the best of reasons for that to happen, but it certainly showed us what the world is probably supposed to be like without quite so much human activity. So in that sense, I love that aspect of it, but not for the reason that it happened, obviously. It's
a very, very good point, actually, because I seem to remember just before lockdown, a couple of months before maybe, and Greta Thunberg was taking all sorts of stick by one sort of group of people or another. But the minute we went into lockdown and all the factories closed down and all the airplanes stopped flying, everywhere just became beautiful, didn't it? It was bizarre, really.
Yeah, it is bizarre, isn't it? Because you think that, well, surely we can attempt to achieve this without the dreadful reason that we were facing or are still facing. Yeah, I know, it's amazing. I found that as well in terms of the lack of planes. I mean, we all like to travel, and I don't want to lose the ability to travel on airplanes, but I have to say that it was so different without them. And you could see stars at night. The skies were quiet. You could hear birds again, and I really appreciate it. I'm slightly depressed that that's already beginning to fade as we're coming out of lockdown.
Yeah.
Which is something, I don't know, I can't help feeling that we should be aiming for I know this phrase new normal keeps being bandied about, but it has to be tangible. And one of the new aspects of new normal should be giving more space to nature somehow. Very difficult because there's so many people.
And so there's so many people with different views as well. A lot of people, they're just not interested for some bizarre reason. But, it just highlighted it 100% what the likes of Greta was saying. And it's like, well, there it is. There's the example. That's you don't need anything better than that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
Yeah, but for you, you got a new album coming out, new single, and
yeah.
But I want to talk about that in depth in a moment. But back when it all started, I always remember when I was a teenager, every lad I knew either wants to be a footballer or a pop star. You achieved the pop star bit. Was it always the plan? Was that on the agenda for you?
Yeah, I didn't. I liked football. I was never going to get anywhere in it. Yeah. It was. I mean, I grew up in a musical family, and that in and of itself is not a ticket to becoming I grew up with the idea that it was possible. And my dad was a successful jazz musician. And so you couple that with the fact that I grew up in a time when, the Beatles were still around. They split up when I was 6 years old, I think. So I have some very clear recollection of their influence, not just obviously beyond their time, but during their time. And I think what the Beatles said to us, and then others like, the Kinks and the Who and the like, was that you could be British, you could be a musician, and you could be globally influential, and you can also be socially relevant at the same time. You didn't just have to create music which was just entertainment for entertainment's sake. You could actually say things of value.
Yeah.
And reach the world, and that really appealed to me. I was very, as a young person, I was, in a way political, but more socially concerned. And so the idea of music being a means of communication between me and the listener, just for me to say, hey, this is what I think, what do you feel about that, became very important to me. So, you think about the Beatles, and then we transitioned into the 70s, Stevie Wonder, the Moody Blues. There were a lot of people doing that, the Isley Brothers. And so it became more and more compelling, the idea of being a musician, that it was on one hand because I love music, but on the other hand because I wanted to share some thoughts with people about the world.
Yeah. And as a teenager, I read that Won't Get Fooled Again. You were about, 18 when you released that?
Yeah, You Fooled Me Once Again is the full title. I think Won't Get Fooled Again was a Who record, actually.
Oh yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
Wasn't quite as good as the Who record. Yeah.
What was it called again?
It was called You Fooled Him Once Again.
You Fooled Him Once Again.
Which is very simple. You Fooled Him Once Again. Yeah, I was 17, and the only place you can find that record now, weirdly, is on, the streaming services, on an album called Classic Funk Volume 1.
Right.
So, little beknownst to me, I was going to end up on Classic Funk Volume 1. And I was a bit of a soul boy at that point. So, it was it's fitting that that's where it ended up anyway.
Yeah. But just off the basis of that single, you're signed by Warner Brothers and you're off to LA. I mean, you're living the dream already, aren't you? You're not even 20.
Well, it sounds very... If you put it that way, it sounds like I'm whisked up on a private jet and it's all laid out for me. It was tough. That was the school of hard knocks. I mean, throughout that period of time, people talk about how, let's say, Cole sometimes, or maybe Simon Cowell is on X Factor. That's nothing.
Yeah.
That's we're back to entertainment. So he can only go just so far until someone breaks down into tears and he's fulfilled his requirement. In the real world, back when you had to get a record deal in order to have a record release, no streaming, of course, you had to go through labels. Some of those people who responded to demo tapes were brutal, really unkind. And I will never forget that. And I remember which companies were like that and which companies were not. So when I went to Warner's, I was signed to a short-term publishing deal with them. It was really to give it a go. And I came back a year later. It was a good experience, but absolutely determined to write my own material for myself from that point on. I wasn't going to write for anyone else. It just wasn't for me.
No. Well, I'm always intrigued when people write for other people, because how does it work? You just write like hundreds of songs and then they choose one if you're lucky, or how does it work?
Well, you know what? You're asking the wrong person, Andy, because I don't know. I'm not in that world. I never have been. I mean, fast forward many, many years later, I co-wrote the last Mike and the Mechanics last album of new material, which was called Let Me Fly. And that was an absolute anomaly for me. I did it because it was Mike Rutherford. And I always loved Mike and the Mechanics, and I knew Mike from the 80s. And it was a really a mutually appreciative collaboration. But beyond that, I mean, from what I understand, it's like for jobbing songwriters, it's like throwing mud against a brick wall and hoping some of it will stick. It really is like that. Now, I got clued up pretty quickly that that's not the world I wanted to be part of. That's why I go back to the Beatles. The Beatles broke the mold specifically because they wrote their own material. They never co-wrote. They never went to professional writers. They did their own thing. Now, there were a few people before then, a few who had done that, like Buddy Holly as an example. But the Beatles became masters of it. And that was so inspiring. And that's why I think the British music of the 60s, 70s and 80s happened the way it did. It was all rooted in, we need to do this ourselves and we need to be good at it. So I'm a firm believer in the reason that the quality of songs was there in the 60s, 70s and 80s was because, you were kind of taking the place of the professional songwriters of the past, whether that was Cole Porter or Rodgers and Hammerstein or Sammy Kahn or whoever, or Burt Bacharach and Hal David. You had to be damn good.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that is what happened in those eras, that the artists who wrote their own material did become damn good.
Yeah. Well, we'll hold it there, I think, for a bit of music. We're speaking this afternoon on the Stage and Screen show, Calon FM, to Clark Datchler, founder member and original frontman of Johnny Hates Jazz. And I think we'll go back to when it all started for you, Clark, back in 1981. Now, let me get this right. You fooled him once again. Now, get into this. But it wasn't until 1986 that you formed Johnny Hates Jazz. And in hindsight, the success of the band, it looked from the outside like it was immediate. Is that fair to say, or was there a long, hard slog before you even became a name?
Yeah, there was a long, hard slog. And partly that was the fact we all met at Rack Studios in London. Rack is still going. Mm-hmm. And Rack was the studios attached to the record label that was founded and run by Mickey Most, the legendary producer of Hot Chocolate, The Animals, The Yardbirds, Donovan, Kim Wilde. I mean, he was the most successful record producer of his time and beyond. But I was signed to Rack as part of a band called Hot Club, and another founder member of Johnny Hates Jazz, Calvin Hayes, was already in Hot Club. He was Mickey's son. Another member of the band was Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols, James Stevenson from Chelsea and Generation X. Wow. We were a right old mishmash.
Yeah.
And in getting signed to Rack, Mickey Most liked my voice and decided to give me a solo deal and suggested I write with a guy called Mike Nacito, a young engineer come producer from the US who had just started at Rack Studios. And Mike became the other founder member of Johnny Hates Jazz, along with Calvin and myself. So we worked together for about 4 years in different configurations, never the three of us together. And then in 1986, we put out the first Johnny Hates Jazz single, Me and My Foolish Heart, which was the first time the three of us collaborated. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a hit, and I wasn't the writer of that song, actually. That was a new one for me. I actually sung a song that the other guys had written with a couple of other people. And then I went away and said, look, let me try writing some songs for Johnny Hates Jazz for us. And the first one I wrote was called Shattered Dreams. And on the strength of Shattered Dreams and I Don't Want to Be Here and Turn Back the Clock, and I think it was Don't Say It's Love, we got signed to Virgin Records, new record deal. And Shattered Dreams came out, and it was a big hit globally. So it was quite a journey.
But Shattered Dreams, I was looking at the statistics of it. I mean, number 5 in the UK, number 2 in America and Japan. I mean, you'd be forgiven for getting a little bit excited at that point, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was you'd got through the door, and the door most of the time was locked. There was only a very few people whom the record labels and life let through that door, gave the chance to someone to experience that. So, yeah, it was a very heady time, very exciting. And at the same time, we weren't managed by anyone. We didn't have a manager. We managed ourselves. And we hadn't recorded an album. Virgin had signed us just on what was called a singles deal. They only really thought we were going to, kind of get by with 1 or 2 singles and that would be it.
Yeah.
So when the first single, Shattered Dreams, suddenly became this huge hit, we got a call saying, okay, lads, when's the album going to be finished? To which we said, you never asked us to make an album. You ... idiots, So it wasn't like that. It was more that, they suddenly realised what they'd done. And so we ended up travelling the world promoting Shattered Dreams and then I Don't Want to Be Here and then Turn Back the Clock and then having to rush back to London managing ourselves all the time, getting back into the studio. We had no other producers, only, a very small group of session players who would help us here and there, but mostly we did it ourselves. So we were back in the studio recording the album. So it was a really intense time as well. And we had to sometimes just remember to celebrate the fact that we were on that journey at all, because it was so busy.
Because, in 1988 then, when the album goes straight in at number one, double platinum status even, and everyone's riding high on the success, and then you decide to part company with the band. Why? I think it's the question.
Well, I was a much younger fella, obviously. No one needs to work that out, to any degree. But and so I was less mature. I think I made certain things were more important to me then than became in later life. And one of the things that really affected me actually was the way Johnny Hates Jazz was perceived in Britain. In the rest of the world, by and large, we were not promoted as a team group. We were just promoted as this musical entity that was kind of, I guess somewhere in the realm of Prefab Sprout or Scritti Politti or somewhere like that. In actual fact, people come up to me now and they often cite their three favourite bands of the 80s as being Tears for Fears, Depeche Mode and Johnny Hates Jazz. So go figure.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised at that. I'm not, because I think it's a sensibility of the decade and the longevity with which we try to create music. But I think at the time in Britain, Virgin definitely had latched onto the simplest way to get us to capitalise on our success as quickly as possible was to market us as a team group. And after a while, I started to think, we're never going to get out of this. It started to influence the more serious music press, who started to have, I think, some very unhealthy attitudes towards Johnny Hates Jazz, bar, I have to say, NME, New Musical Express, who probably gave us the best album review we'd ever had. In fact, the best article we'd ever had. So it's a bit of a contradiction, that. But I felt that we were digging ourselves into a hole, and I didn't want to dig too deep. I decided to jump ship, basically.
But it shows a considerably strong character. Sure, there must have been a lot of people trying to persuade you otherwise.
Yeah, I would say strong-headed, strong-willed. I'm not sure that it's a reflection of just being a strong character, because that would require, I think, someone to be more balanced than I was. I was still a young guy in the midst of, a lot of success, so that, of course, affects your judgment. But yeah, a lot of people tried to persuade me otherwise, and they were right in doing so. I think they all felt I was making a huge mistake, and maybe I did in retrospect, maybe I didn't. No one will ever know that. The only person who really kind of quietly understood it, even though he was very worried about me, was my dad. Right. When he found out this is what I was going to do, he got on the phone, he said, "Look, are you sure about this?" And I gave him my reasons, and he just went quiet and he said, "Well, I can understand that. So, just do it in the best way you can." And there was no good way to walk out on a band that were number 2 on, in the US chart at that point. It was a very complicated situation, but that's what it was.
And it was your band, it was your baby, really, and incredibly, you just let them keep the name and the brand, if you like, and they just carried on with a new lead singer, right?
Well, I never contested the name, and I didn't think it was right to. And part of the reason was that Mike, my colleague in Johnny Hates Jazz, Calvin's no longer in the band, so it's just Mike and I. Mike came up with the name, so as far as I was concerned, it would be absolutely wrong of me to go to court over a name that I didn't invent.
Yeah.
And I also thought, I wasn't self-aware enough to know what I was doing, that, I was putting them in an incredibly difficult situation, because it was their baby too. Yeah. It was each of our baby in its own way. And I didn't, I thought, well, the least I can do is not get complicated over the name, and they can make their way with someone else who turned out to be Phil Thornalley, who was one of the writers on the very first Johnny Hates Jazz single, Me and My Foolish Heart. He was an old friend of all of ours, and they went forward and did their thing.
I mean, the funny thing, I never really ever ask anybody when I'm interviewing them how they came up with the name, but your name intrigues me. Johnny Hates Jazz. What's behind that? Where does that come from? That?
Well, Mike's brother is Johnny. He's never been in the band, and Johnny was at a family gathering where Mike was as well, and someone put on a Dave Brubeck record. I think Mike said it was take 5. I should know after all these years. And Johnny walked over to the record player, vinyl record player back then, ripped the record off and broke it in 2 over his knee. And someone in the room exclaimed, amid all these gasps, it was a bit of a radical thing to do, if you don't like a bit of music, usually you can just change the record or, change the track. But he broke it and someone gasped saying, oh my God, Johnny Hates Jazz. And Mike remembered this phrase for some reason, just thinking, what a bizarre phrase.
Yeah.
And when he suggested it as the band name, we just loved it because it was, on one hand, it made us chuckle. On the other hand, it was quite reactionary. I mean, I never had anything against jazz. I don't think the other guys did, but we knew that it would rile some people. And at that age, you can't help but want to rile some people. It's part of being, a younger person. You kind of, that's part of society at that time of life. So the weird thing was I never intended it to rile my father being a jazz musician, and it did. He didn't speak to me for a month. Yeah, but he got over it. We made amends when I explained the story to him. I said, Dad, look, my favourite singer is Nat King Cole, which is true to this day. I'm not anti-jazz at all. Johnny is.
Oh, brilliant. I think, and I was quite surprised, and I think like everybody else, there was actually nobody in the band called Johnny, which, perfect. Time for a bit more music, I think. And we're speaking this afternoon to Clark Datchler of Johnny Hates Jazz, and this is their first major hit. This is Shattered Dreams from 1987 on the Stage and Screen show, Calon FM. So when you left the band, did you immediately embark on a solo career, or did you sort of take a back seat for a while?
No, I did. I did an album called Rain Dance, which, I worked with some of the great session players in LA. I, of course, wrote all the songs myself. And what was interesting about that album, it eventually only came out in Japan. And one of the reasons for that was that the first single that Virgin chose was a song called Crown of Thorns. And Crown of Thorns was actually a song that was critical of religion, of mainstream religion. And it's a really strong melody, but it was a very brave choice for Virgin to make. I didn't get involved in that decision. I just said, which one do you want to go with? And they said, we want to go with Crown of Thorns, which was, there's no doubt you're asking for trouble if you're trying to launch a pop career with a song about organized religion and having my say about it. So I never really thought it was going to do much. I, quietly hoped, but I thought it was a complicated choice. But then again, it wasn't their fault. I'm a complicated individual, and I'm very complicated about what I want to write about. I mean, you think about the second Johnny Hates Jazz hit, I Don't Want to Be a Hero, was a blatant anti-war song. So I've always done it. Mm-hmm. But really, that put pay to that. I think in Japan, they just loved the music so much, they ran with the album. And actually, there were two singles that did well over there. But I then re-recorded that album, actually, or remixed it and added some extra tracks with the legendary producer Rupert Hine, who produced Tina Turner, Howard Jones, The Fix, who very sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago. That was a moment in time.
But the Crown of Thorns, I thought that was, that was fantastic. When I first heard that, it rang a bell with me, because I can remember distinctly at the age of about 15 and starting to question. I was brought up Church of England, but there's a sort of, I think there's a time for everybody when you kind of think, right, what's going on here? But are we just being fed a load of stories? Is there anything? But it's when it gets quite dangerous for me, like when, you've got the President of the United States saying we're praying for people when 40 kids have been shot in a school, and you think, that's very strange. That shouldn't be happening.
It's a weird one, Andy, that, because Personally, my criticism was not of an individual's sense of being spiritual or seeing the world and life through spiritual terms, because that should be everyone's personal decision, whether they choose to or not, or whether they do or don't. You can be an atheist or not. My issue, and this really goes back to what you were saying, is that it's how beliefs become institutionalized, and questioning is not encouraged. I mean, we should question everything.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here in life. I really think that. I mean, that's why some of the great discoveries were made through questioning. And the approach I had with Crown of Thorns is something that I think it still resonates with me. I never questioned the existence of Jesus. I took it that, okay, this individual existed and he went through the life the way he did, but it's what happened later on that kind of deified him, turned him into this non-human, this super messiah, and in that sense, he then becomes an individual unreachable because he's been given these incredible superpowers. And I actually thought that the story had much more pathos when you just think of him as being an individual, a human being. I'm not trying to ram that opinion down other people's throats. That was my musing over that particular subject. I mean, I could wax lyrical on that, other religions as well, but I don't mean to single out Church of England. Like you, Andy, I was raised Church of England. But, I think it's good to question. I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll hold it there again for a little bit more music. We are, of course, speaking to Clark Datchler, founder, member and original frontman of Johnny Hates Jazz, this afternoon on the Stage and Screen Show. And this is the very first single off the brand new album. The album's called Wide Awake, and this is the beautiful Spirit of Love. It tickled me the other day that after however long it's been, five months of lockdown, it was announced that there's a vaccine been found, and people were saying, well, I'm not taking it. And you think that people are questioning the vaccine, and you just think that's a good thing, isn't it? Surely that people aren't just going to just go along with it for the sake because they've been told to.
I think it's what's very important is that, again, all of this requires research. I do feel we live in a very binary time. I'm sure most of your listeners would agree with that, Andy. It's hard not to see the world being, polarized. You've got one view or another.
Yeah. And
you either, for example, with the vaccine, you're either going to accept the vaccine without question, or the other side of it is that, Bill Gates is imbuing it with nanotech that's going to lead to our control, basically. And I'm not saying, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but I think if we just see the world in these polar opposite terms, we turn the world into a medieval place where you're either right or wrong.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in between. There's no sense of, well, something can be balanced or imbalanced to varying degrees. And I have a real concern that the internet has engendered this situation, because we all are given a soapbox now. Everyone can just, in the space of a few words, say, this is what I think.
Yeah.
And that's not a conversation, that's just an opinion.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I agree with you from that perspective. We need to have conversations. There needs to be question and answer. And I doubt if that's going to happen in the realm of the internet regarding something like a vaccine.
Absolutely. But I just thought there was such excitement surrounding it that I thought, isn't it funny that the amount of people who said, well, a lot of people stopped their children having the MMR jab, for argument's sake, because of autism surrounding it, and I thought, well, it's a good point, actually. No, it hasn't been tested to that extreme yet, so let's just not get excited too much.
Yeah,
Yeah. But funnily enough, I think we better start talking about your new song, your new album. I listened to your new song yesterday, and the New Day Ahead, and it was a funny old thing, because when I first heard it, I thought, oh, that's good timing, because it sort of ties up with what we're living through at the moment. That there are we're living through hard times, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. But it was nothing to do with lockdown. It was it was to do with the environment. It was a strong environmental message in this track, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, New Day Ahead is the second single off the forthcoming album, Wide Awake, actually. I did say earlier that I habitually write songs with big subjects, because that engages me as well. I can't just write relationship songs. I mean, it seems that the charts are full of them now. I couldn't do it. Good on you if you can keep writing about the same old thing. So it's not my first environmental song. I've written quite a few in the past, but New Day Ahead really took a particular approach, which is very much a can-do attitude, very much a sense of, we're not beaten yet. The signs are not looking good. Yet another climate report recently focusing on breaking the heat record in the Arctic as measured in Siberia, and the wildfires that happened in Siberia. I mean, shocking. The oil spill that happened in Siberia recently as a result of the permafrost melting beneath the oil tank that was sitting upon it. I mean, the stories just go on and on. It's very concerning, but we actually do have the technology to mitigate the worst effects of this. The question is, do we have the will? And so the children's strikes against climate change or rather against climate change in action, I think have been a really, really fantastic move. And I'm really addressing, in many ways, the kids. I'm just saying, you know what? Although sometimes this is painted as being a generational problem, for example, one thing that I do feel about Greta Thunberg is that she can be, I think she's very well informed, she's very courageous, but there are times when she can be a bit polarizing as well, because she says, our generation is to blame and they're living with the consequences. Well, no, that's not the case, because there are plenty of people in our generation who have been fighting for years for a more balanced approach to human interaction with the planet and with the natural world. It's just not true that it was all one thing, then suddenly all another.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of addressing the younger generation, saying, look, we're all in this together. We all want to win this. Let's really make some noise. Let's really change things, because, like I say, I do think that the will is building, but we're fighting a system that we've all been part of creating and we're all dependent upon. For example, we come out of lockdown, and there's a lot of emphasis on the green shoots of recovery, coming up with a way to reinvigorate the economy in a less environmentally harmful way. But I'm not kidding myself that the need to kickstart the economy is absolutely urgent.
Yeah.
So it's a real paradox. There are no simple solutions here. A company that is nearly going under cannot suddenly think about installing solar panels on their roof when everyone who works for them could lose their job tomorrow. No, they've just got to get up and running. I totally appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we have to have a long-term view here. And New Day Ahead is saying we have a bright future if we play this well and we work together. And that's going to be the critical thing. All the different nations of the world working together at a pace that is possible for where they are in their development.
And on a different point about the song, I mean, I'm a bit of an old rocker, right? So I was immediately drawn in. It's got a sort of 1970s rock feel to it. It was straight away I was drawn into that. Is that an intentional thing when you write a track, that straight away, or do you try different angles for it?
That's an interesting question, Andy. Very good question with New Day Ahead, actually, because like you, in the 70s, I was a rocker. My favourite band is Rainbow.
Right.
So, I'm more from that into punk. I went through all kinds of phases musically. So that was always there in me. And I went through a phase where I was, of course, immersed in glam. Sweet and T-Rex.
Yeah.
Where I listened to them a lot. So with New Day Ahead, I had the song, a lot of the song already written, but it did have a different rhythm. And when I started playing with a glam rhythm, which is that kind of shuffle, there are certain songs that will probably come to mind with some of the older members of your audience as to what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It just suddenly fell into place. And interestingly, as Johnny Hates Jazz have evolved in the 2000s, we've become live, in terms of the live performance, we've become more of a rock band, just naturally. So I think that element of our roots is coming out, and it really came out on New Day Ahead. I mean, that is one of my favourite tracks, to a large extent for the reasons you gave, Andy. I like rock music. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, if I was to write a song tomorrow, it would definitely definitely have a Status Quo vibe.
Oh yeah, cool. Well, you know what? Isn't that amazing? You look back in retrospect, and Quo were massive, but they had their challenges with being taken as seriously as some of the other hard rock bands. And now we're at the point in time we've lost Rick Parfitt, terrible loss. And you hear those tracks and you just think, how could anyone have questioned that?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, they're just fantastic songs. They're great.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed Francis Rossi last November, and I was talking to him about this, because it was, for me, you see, being a big Status Quo fan, it was the tracks that weren't big hits that sort of hit me where I live, really. That it was all the kind of rocking all over the world and whatever you want tracks. I can kind of go, yeah, nice. But the ones that were album tracks, they're the ones that you go, wow, they were a good band.
Very interesting. Well, I have to refresh my memory on Status Quo, and I'd gladly do it. Very much so.
Yeah. Well, this new album, as you say, it's called Wide Awake, out on the 14th of August. Do you get a bit sort of nervous when you're putting out an album like this, or is it an exciting time? How does it work?
Actually, Andy, I have to say it literally just got moved back to August the 21st.
Oh, did it? Right, okay.
Yeah, today that happened. So sorry you didn't have that information. Sorry, what was your question?
Is it a nerve-wracking time for you, or is it an exciting experience to put things like this out?
It's a bit of both, because the world is in flux, and none more so than the musical world. The music industry has become dependent on live shows, on gigging, because no one, bar a very, very small group of people, and let's call them an elite, are making any money from streaming. Streaming is potentially the death of music. It's not a good situation, and I hope more and more people get to realise that.
Yeah. Well, I've often thought that about like the Spotify and the like. I mean, how does anybody ever make any money after putting your life and soul into something, and then it's just basically streamed online for free if you want it? Yeah,
precisely. That's and the irony is that I stream. It's not like I'm immune to that. The problem is it's almost like the music industry has become a monoculture. It's like if you think about some of the reasons behind the potato famine in Ireland, it's that the locals were encouraged and told to grow one type of potato, and if that type of potato was affected by blight, everyone starved. Well, in music, the same attitude is with the live world. Everyone has been told, you got to just play live, get out on the road, that's what it's all about. Well, actually, I come from an era where live was secondary. Making records was the first thing we did. That's what it was all about. And then you went on the road.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that that's right as well. I'm just saying that we need to look at the time we're now stepping into, where we can perform live, and therefore, and this goes in my long-winded way of answering your question, Andy, you've been very patient, I have to say. That's the fact that, it's not the same as releasing a record in the past. You don't really know what you should be depending upon in terms of promotion. What is it? Is it radio plays, TV? Is it newspapers? Not, newspapers don't have the circulation they did in the past, and on and on and on. And what can we expect? And I think I've come to the conclusion that you have to go into this without expectation, and you just say, all I'm wanting to do is communicate. Yes, of course, you can be cynical about it and say, oh, every musician just wants to make money. No, I don't think it's as simple as that. We want to survive. We want to do okay if we can. But it is all about communication. And, I hope that it communicates in such a way where we can keep doing it. Yeah.
Clark, it's been an absolute treat to speak to you this afternoon. Thanks ever so much for that.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate it.
Really, I was so looking forward to speaking to you, and I don't think I've ever had such an interesting interview. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Well, to a large extent, Andy, it was the quality of your questions, and I'm not just saying that to butter you up. I mean, really, there were some really good questions there, which kind of unlocks a cupboard door in some dark, musty room in my mind, and I have those perspectives, so thank you.
Excellent, mate. You take care of yourself, and
all right.
Good luck with it all. Take care.
Cheers, Andy. Bye for now.
Cheers, buddy. Bye.
Well, it's a crazy time.
So there you go, an absolutely fantastic interview with Clark Datchler there, the lead singer with Johnny Hates Jazz. And as he says, the brand new album Wide Awake is to be released on the 21st of August. It's called Wide Awake, and you can pre-order it now. Go to johnnyhatesjazz.com. You can pre-order it there, and will be available to download from the 21st of August. And don't forget, the brand new single, A Brilliant New Day Ahead, is out on the 7th of August. There you go, Clark Datchler of Johnny Hates Jazz. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show. It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show. It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show. It's the Andy Snowden Radio Show.